Welcome. You are listening to the Mindful Minute, meditations created for everyday joy. I'm your host, Meryl Arnett, and my passion is making meditation accessible and enjoyable. This podcast is recorded from my live Monday night meditation class, where we have a brief discussion followed by a guided meditation. If you would like to access these meditation practices as standalone audio files for your daily practice, please subscribe to my newsletter at merylarnett.com. It's free, and you'll receive a new mini meditation each week, along with behind-the-scenes content and bonus material for each podcast episode. All right, let's grab a cup of tea, a comfy seat, and settle in for today's practice. Well, hello and welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Mindful Minute. Thank you guys for tuning in, as always. So we have just journeyed through the month of January. And in the month of January, you notice we did something a little different. I had a bunch of interviews in a row, which I don't normally do. We had two interviews talking about the emotion of awe and the importance of awe in our everyday lives. And then we had an awesome interview with Jacqueline Suskin about creativity and really using seasonality and honoring the cycle of the year as a way to support our own creative endeavors, whether creativity is something that we do for a living or simply the thing that we do to support our souls. And in all of those conversations, there was an underlying thread of being tied to the natural world, right? Whether that was experiencing awe in the natural world, whether that was using the season and the experience of, we talked about winter as a way to sort of foster our creative fires. And that thread is going to continue in all the episodes moving forward of the Mindful Minute. It's a piece that is present in so many wisdom traditions, so many. My particular lineage, as you know, I study a lot in tantric meditation. And within that lineage, there are many teachings around the natural world, the outer world around us being the macrocosm, and our internal landscape being the microcosm. They are mirrors, they are the same. And we see that in, there are so many phrases that get tossed about as above, so below, as within, as without, that are all sort of saying the same thing, which is that there's really no difference between what is happening outside and what is happening inside. And because of that, we can use that connection to the natural world as a way to connect more deeply to ourselves, to all those around us, to the environment. And it's something that I really want us to pay attention to moving forward. And my devoted listeners will know, I started down this path a handful of years ago, particularly when I started writing meditations paired with soundscapes recorded by my partner in the app Roots, Gordon Hempton, who, he would go out into the natural world, record these incredible soundscapes. And then you and I, wherever we were, even if we're sitting in our closet doing a meditation, we could pop in our headphones and we could be connected to a very particular landscape in a particular moment in time and use that connection to find that same experience within ourselves. And so today, I am bringing a new friend and collaborator on to the podcast. Nick, I just realized that I forgot to ask you before I hit record. How do you say your last name?
Oh, it's McMahan.
McMahan. Okay, I
Yeah.
totally would have gotten it wrong. Nick
No worries.
McMahan, who I met through Gordon and the folks at Roots. And we are going to be partnering together for several episodes to bring to life some of the experiences of the natural world and use them for our inner experience as well. Yeah. And today we're going to talk about winter. So Nick is a nature field recordist in Washington State. He's worked with Gordon Hempton. He's worked with Audible, so many different places. And Nick, I'm really glad that you're here and going to be here for several episodes. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do? Maybe how you
Definitely.
started doing it.
Yeah. It's kind of a unusual thing and has probably a more winding path than I need to explain right now. But I think my first real kind of clicking moment with the recording in the wilderness and recording nature sounds probably happened while I was hiking in the Cascades. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so the Cascade Mountains have kind of been in my backyard of my whole life, and I grew up hiking in them. And I was doing a hike by myself, and I had recently started hiking by myself instead of with friends more at this time about 6, 7 years ago. And I guess I just had a little bit more like silence around me because I wasn't talking to other people. And I was hiking along and I heard this water trickling under these rocks. I was kind of scrambling over, and scrambling is kind of a form of off trail um, hiking where you're not where you're kind of going across sometimes steeper terrain. And I heard this really interesting water sound, and I kind of was looking for it, and I realized that my phone could record like record notes or different things. So I started finding different places where I could stick my phone in little crevices and recording the water sound, and I just found it really fascinating.
Mhm.
And it just these like little things started building, and I was mostly doing these really short snippets of recordings. Um, and then in 2019, I ran into Gordon Hempton through a podcast, um, a Pacific Northwest podcast called The Wild or Into the Wild or something like
With Chris
that.
Morgan.
Yeah, that one.
I love that podcast.
Awesome. Nice. You've heard of it. Cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. And yeah, I was totally like blown away by what Gordon had to say, and his colleague Matt, and like the work they're doing, like just with recording, but also environmentally. And I felt like it really spoke to me with kind of my interests in hiking and listening. And I also had a background in music, so I was already kind of a recordist, I guess. And I met Gordon for coffee, and he invited me to come to Ecuador with him.
Mm.
And we went to Ecuador and recorded sounds in the Amazon for about a week, um, on like the doorstep of COVID. Um, and so that was in March of 2020. So I had this wonderful teacher learning experience from Gordon in this like crazy environment in a really remote part of the Amazon, and came back and the world like got really quiet and kind of shut
Mhm.
down. Um, and I stayed with my parents for a couple months and recorded nature sounds in like the Oregon wilderness, kind of eastern Oregon. And so that was like honestly a really great time for me, and I think about that time really fondly, hiking by myself and starting to count, jets flying over, or if I would hear a chainsaw in the distance, and like really tuning my ear to external sounds but also natural sounds.
Mm.
So I guess that's kind of like the beginning of it all, and it's kind of really blossomed from there.
That is incredible. And one of the things that I really learned in conversation with Gordon is he would be speaking about a recording experience, him being outside listening. And the words that he would use, the description that he would use was identical to the words I would use describing a meditative experience. And he never said
Mm,
meditation. And what I perceived was that's entirely what he was doing in a different context, right? It was not cross-legged on the ground on a quote unquote meditation cushion. And what he was doing was so contemplative. What you do is so contemplative. The act of listening is so interesting because a piece of it is very external. We're listening out here to what's happening. It's also very internal. There is a way of listening internally as well. And I really like this partnership of speaking about listening to sounds outside and tuning your ear to hear specific things and the difference between things in the same way that we talk about meditating and being aware. We can be very aware of all these thoughts in the forefront of our mind when we close our eyes. And it's not that that goes away. It's not that the jets overhead don't go away, right?
Yeah.
But we also start to hear other things that are there. And so that's really something that I'm hoping that you and I bring to the forefront for listeners is how we listen, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've been surprised how after sometimes being on a trip recording for a few days, I feel like without even realize that I was processing something. Or
Mm.
sometimes I do it almost intentionally. I go out on these trips and I'm like, I'm gonna kind of process, um, whatever it is that I feel like is going on, and I come back feeling really refreshed. Sometimes, usually, not always, but
So we're here to talk about winter, which we're going to do. And I have been smiling about this. So we listeners, Nick and I obviously have had multiple conversations about winter leading up to today. And I have been smiling so much and really laughing over the starting point of this conversation. We sat down and I said, well, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm thinking for this episode. I'm going to tell you about my experience of winter. And I say a couple things. And you didn't say this exactly, but what I heard was like, wow, you and I have very different winters, right? So I'm in Atlanta, I'm in the South. It's very, I mean, I think it's really cold here today, actually, but it's like in the low 40s. And there is no snow. I haven't seen snow in years,
yeah.
years. And there are no leaves on the trees. There's just
Mhm.
lots and lots of bare branches and some wind. And like, I don't actually own a winter coat. I have a fleece that I sometimes wear and often don't. And you are not in the South. So,
Yeah.
what is winter like where you are?
uh, so I grew up on the west side of Washington State, which is a fairly mild winter. It'll usually snow once a year. Sometimes the last couple of years there was a little bit more. I feel like in my childhood there was some heavy snow years, but we'll also have years where it doesn't really snow at all and barely, it gets to freezing. So it can be very mild. I now live on the east side of the state, and um, this morning when I checked, it was -2 out with wind chill,
Oh my God.
which is very cold. We had a cold snap come through this past
Mhm.
week, and I think the coldest temperature I've seen since I've lived over here. And I think we with wind chill hit -20, um,
Well,
which is crazy. And you definitely need a winter coat for that.
yeah.
And there's a little bit of snow on the ground, but it's been very beautiful too. There's
Mm.
something really kind of special about it.
I love that. And I was remembering I I teach a mindfulness retreat every year on the winter solstice. And the previous winter solstice, I had sent out an email. It's a virtual retreat. And so I had sent an email to all the participants from all over. And I said, hey, before we get online together, take 2 minutes, go step outside, look up at the night sky, and like connect with what's actually happening on this specific day before we sit down to be in our practice. And then when we got on Zoom, one of the participants who I think was in, I'm going to say Michigan, I can't remember, wherever it was, very cold. And she was like, if I go outside right now, my eyelashes will literally freeze. Like, that's not a thing we do here. We don't go outside in the middle of the night. It is very cold. And it was another moment of, we experience seasonality in a very specific way. And so you and I will talk about two different ways. And listeners, please be reflecting on what winter is like where you are. What is it like? As Nick and I are talking, there has been this winter storm sort of moving through the states, especially in the Midwest. It's been very cold, lots of snow. There's been oddly like some tornadoes down in the South. It's a very abnormal time of year for that to be happening. So let yourself be reflecting not just on what we say, but what's your experience of winter? What do you see? What do you hear? And I think maybe we're going to start with wind. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. Um, so we're going to listen to some wind moving through pine trees, which is something I hear. And I'm assuming something you hear because you recorded it, Nick. But maybe you can set us up a little bit of like, where were you when you recorded this? What was going on?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. This recording wasn't made too far from where I live, um, further out into the wilderness than kind of the smaller towns around here. But yeah, so the east side of Washington State is mostly pine forests, or sections of it have large pine forests, and because of it being like a bit drier, kind of like the rain shadow of the Cascades. And yeah, so I was out at night. Most of my recordings happen at night because it seems to be the quieter time to record
Mm.
things. But that's also really nice because um, night in winter, when you're dressed for it, can really have this, just there's so much subtlety to the environment and to the soundscapes, and it can be very peaceful. So yeah, there was there was like a light snow kind of covering the ground and the trees, and there's these tall pine trees all around me, and I go out and kind of set up my gear at dusk or something, and then I'll usually leave it recording overnight, but I try to at least spend some time, listening to the environment and being there before I go huddle back in my car or tent or
Mm.
wherever I'll stay somewhat warm for the recording. And it's just so like special for me to like to hear this kind of wind coming down the mountainside or the hillside, and you can just hear it gathering up kind of momentum almost as it comes through, and I'll find that I'm almost like holding my breath as I'm kind of listening through it. It's almost like there's a white noise element to it, but there's so much different textures as, the millions of small pine needles are all vibrating as this gust comes through, and it really like rolls across you, and it really is just kind of a transformative experience for me every time I have it.
Mm.
And hopefully a listener can kind of experience a small glimmer of that. It's always hard to know how it'll translate from the actual experience of being there, which is can be very profound. And I'm really grateful I can reflect on that.
Yeah. I want to, after we listen, let's circle back to the idea of transformative. I really feel that with wind. And I'll know because I work with elemental based meditations a lot and with a lot of different people. It's really interesting to me to hear how different people relate to different elements and in different moments of your life. And so I think before we talk about what you and I maybe glean from wind, why don't we take a listen? I love hearing the creaking of the trees in there a little bit. I'm thinking about the hike I did this weekend with my kids were with me. And there's a bunch of field garlic growing because we sort of hike in a little bit of like marshy. And my daughter was like, "Can I? Is this edible?" I shouldn't use that word. Can I eat this? She probably said. And I said, "Yeah, that's field garlic. You can pick that." And I said, "But you have to ask first. Like this is what we do is we ask the plant, like, can I pick a piece?" And so she does. And I said, "Then you wait and you listen and you decide what you heard." And she said, "Well, how does the plant talk to me?" And we had this whole conversation about the ways that we might hear things that are not in words, right? Something that is outside of the language that we use every day. And I think that both in meditation and in listening to soundscapes, there is this tricky element where now you and I should talk about that. And it's really hard to put words around all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was trying to think about this sense that I feel when I'm hearing the even the recording that I can remember or think back to being in the wilderness and kind of feeling that sound move through me and also the movement of the air and
Mm.
um, it's interesting because lots of times if I'm recording at night, it's easiest just to close my eyes to listen and to kind of, but that's also going in sort of because I feel like with our eyes open, we're so external and, um, but audibly we're also external, but I don't, yeah, it's something about the eyes closed. And I can almost feel this sense of like extending myself through my ears and kind of like it feels very like vibrational I guess is the word.
Mhm.
And I kind of feel this like this kind of just bending with it, almost like I'm extending into the trees, and it just
Mm.
yeah, it's really special to have that.
Almost like a a softening of the boundaries, right, between our
Yeah,
skin, between where we believe we stop,
yeah,
and letting ourselves expand sort of past that boundary.
yeah,
Yeah. I find wind to be, to me, very, the sense it gives me is very cleansing almost in a way, or mm, perhaps even like waking up, like I feel myself sit up straighter when I really hear wind, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
something that
yeah,
I notice in my experience, and I love listening to wind. I like feeling wind when I'm outside. And it's a part of, when I think about meditating outside, it's a part of the experience that really holds me present. Is like
yeah,
that wind moves across you, and you're like, oh, I was getting lost in a daydream, and the wind brought me back.
yeah, 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 absolutely. I that was kind of similar to one of the reflections I was having when I was kind of listening to that for this episode earlier. I was thinking about how I'll realize that as I was listening, I was almost holding my breath, and the wind almost like I realized I have to breathe, and I almost
Mm.
force a breath. But then as I do that, I have more awareness of my breath, and then that's just kind of the breath awareness, and I'm aware of myself within that extended kind of experience. And it's just yeah, it's a, kind of an awareness, bringing back awareness.
And
It's
that's, I
just
mean, you just named the microcosm, right? Is breath being the wind
yeah, yeah, it's
internally. How is the breath moving through us?
yeah,
What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Is it different? This is a question for you. Like, is wind different to you in spring or summer than it
yeah,
is in, yeah, right?
definitely, yeah,
For me
yeah,
too, completely. It's a totally different sound.
yeah. And like another like summer wind within the aspen trees. I mean, it's beautiful, but it is also so yeah, it's so much more lively and kind of active. And
Mm.
and spring wind can be stronger and more kind of buzzing, and this winter wind is there's a lot of subtlety in it. We have strong winds too, and I like to record those as well, but this specific subtle wind is kind of has that unique awareness bringing to it.
Because okay, so I'm speaking about my winter, and maybe this is
Yeah.
not true for everybody's winter. So the woods that I hike in are bare. I mean, there are pine trees, absolutely, but there are not a lot of trees that maintain green leaves where I am.
Mhm.
And so what I see when I walk is trunks and branches. And what I hear with that wind is wind moving through these bare woods. And so the sense that I have is very much one of spaciousness, I think, and perhaps even a sense of like being laid bare in a way, like incredibly raw or vulnerable. Um, yeah, I'm still thinking through those words, but it feels very almost open, right? Like an open book in a way, as opposed to like when you hear or when I hear wind moving through trees full of leaves. And what I'm hearing is like all the stuff in a way that's there. And now in winter, it's almost like I'm hearing what it's like when there's no stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe it's sort of like winter is this where everything kind of is dormant, but then the dormancy is entering into that kind of renewal stage. And it's kind of that cycle. And then the summer is like the fulfillment of that, you know, the
Mm,
potential of the season as summer peaks and spring, you know, everything's growing in the spring and blossoming. And then the summer kind of is the fulfillment of that. And then the fall is the end of that cycle. And then the winter kind of comes back to that openness, you know, that renewing of potential energy for the year.
mm.
I mean, it would be great to. I would love to record. Yeah, the forest without any leaves. We don't have a whole lot of. I guess that would be large deciduous forests here. Most of them are conifer and
Mm.
needly branches,
Yeah.
branches.
So we walk through the woods
Yeah.
and we hear the wind blowing. And I think we're gonna wind up at a frozen lake. Tell me about this lake.
Yes, it also has some pine trees around it,
Mm.
and some near being near the water. It has probably a few aspen and maybe a few cottonwoods. So there's some empty branches nearby. But this lake is maybe a mile or so long and half a mile wide. So it's a modest sized lake. It's not too small, and it's on the foothills of the eastern Cascade Mountains. And in winter, it freezes very solid. This lake was frozen about 2 feet thick, and I know this because I drilled a hole through it by hand, cranking this ice drill. And I kept thinking, I've got to be, you know, almost to the bottom or almost through the ice. And so to record this lake, I drilled through the ice and put a hydrophone in the water, and so I could listen to
Whoa.
it. And yeah, it made some very fascinating sounds. But while I was on the lake, I noticed that there were owls in the forest nearby, and um, it was just such an unusual like experience hearing this, um, you know, very much organic sound, and then this very like environmental sound contrasting each other.
And so are we in the middle of the 2 feet of ice? Are we under the ice? Where are we?
We're on top of the ice.
We're
Yeah,
on
yeah,
top of
yeah.
the ice. Okay.
So yeah, this is so I walked out into the lake, and I guess I could talk more about like the visceral experience of it after we hear it, because maybe
Okay.
it'll make more sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just the sun. It was very beautiful night. I remember it very clearly because the sun had just set and it was kind of like orangey gold, around the edges of the horizon, and I could see all the mountains were just covered in snow. It was very beautiful and very cold out, and I was just standing by myself in the middle of this frozen lake, and the darkness, around you starts to feel very like pressing in a way because of how quick kind of it seems to change from day to night. I think maybe I also noticed that just as I'm focused on the sound and the recording and the technical side of things, sometimes I forget like, oh, it's going to be dark soon, and so it sort of sneaks up on me in winter a little bit more than summer recordings. Um,
Mm.
and it's very loud walking. And I think it just seems loud because the contrast is so much dynamic. Walking on ice with like kind of like some little grippy things. What are they called? You strap them on your shoes so you don't slip. Otherwise, I'd be ice skating all over the place.
I love that. All right, let's
Yeah,
listen.
sounds good.
Frozen Lake. That is incredible sounding.
It's pretty strange.
Oh, I love it. Especially because I'm never on a frozen lake.
Yeah, I probably hadn't gone on many frozen lakes before I started recording them.
And so is that the sound of ice? Is that what we're hearing? Is like the
Yep.
movement of ice, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And you can hear it from the parking lot sometimes.
Really?
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, it's very excuse me. It's very surreal. And yeah, it's this in this situation, it's like as soon as I got out of the car, I was like, "Oh, it's happening. It's like really going on." And and you can see the edge of the lake has actually pushed up because as water freezes, it expands. And so when a bunch of water is frozen like 2 feet thick across such a large surface, it pushes ice up onto the shore. So there's kind of these chunks of ice that have pushed up, and um, but then as soon as you're walking on it, you feel these kind of like percussive cracks and pops along the way, and it's kind of disconcerting at first. You think, is something about to happen? It feels kind of like almost ominous,
Mm.
and I've I've learned that actually it typically means that it's very safe. It means the ice is thick and usually expanding, because as it expands, it fractures. So
Oh,
it's this large surface that's kind of doing that across, this, almost square mile. Um, and you can hear it in the distance, but then when it happens near you, and it feels like you're walking and you can see these cracks, it almost feels like it goes through you, and it's very, it's almost disconcerting. But then once you kind of overcome this fear, and there's definitely kind of an element of that for me anyway. I guess it's probably a healthy fear to
Yeah.
have, walking on frozen, something that's frozen water. Kind of once I overcome it, I can really enjoy it and really kind of settle into it. And I think listening back, it doesn't feel near as frightening. It's very kind of just interesting and
I feel
detailed.
fear. I
Okay.
totally felt it. Hearing it, I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like, I just got to highlight what you just said, which is as it expands, it fractures. I mean, listeners, give me a break. Is there a better metaphor? Like, this is why nature is so unbelievably powerful to me as a source of connection to like as we expand, we fracture. And is it not sometimes disconcerting when we sit in meditation with ourselves? I mean, have we not all had that moment where we're like, I got to get off this cushion, this frozen lake, because what if it cracks and I fall? Right? Like, and I did as I was listening, for sure. I was like, are we like in the middle of the lake? Is it cracking? Is it what am I hearing? I wasn't 100% sure. And there's something about asking those questions. There's something about staying instead of running away, right? It's so powerful to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you able to hear the owl in that one? Okay.
Yes. Oh, I love the owl.
I always feel like that feels a little grounding to me, this kind of resonating, just the hooting, and it feels so like, I don't know, it almost feels warming. It's not really warm, but it just feels like someone's watching over, or something is kind of like a
Mm,
presence is there. And I think that night there actually was one that flew across, because there was clearly a couple of them in the area. One flew, and it's just the silent, like, dark flight of an owl is kind of just a really special experience to see too.
yes.
And it feels kind of reassuring, for me. I'm not sure why, because they are birds of prey, but um, they're- I know that they can see, they can see so well, and they can hear so well. And so they're there listening and talking, just on the shore. And yeah, for once I overcome the fear and know that I'm not gonna fall through the ice, and that the sounds sometimes can be a little surprising, but you can kind of let those surprises be part of the experience, and let that happen, and it passes, and kind of, maybe I don't know, maybe like watching a movie that makes a person jump, it can kind of be more enjoyable to have the surprise. I'll go out, maybe 100 yards, 300, 400 feet onto the ice, and lay there and spread out, and just like, and you can feel some of them, the ones that are close, you can feel the ice like shift, and it's very subtle. And it's probably the sound of it makes it feel larger than it is, but yeah, it's a very amazing experience.
That is incredible. And we're going to be really cold after we sit out or lay out on a frozen lake,
Yeah.
which I really want to do now. And so, how about we find a campfire?
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is this campfire happening?
This fire was recorded fairly close to where the pines were recorded, the pine wind, and um, you might even be able to kind of hear a similar element to it, because there is this hillside where you can hear the wind, contrasting the fire. But yeah, it's eastern Washington as well, and kind of east of the Cascade Mountains.
Let's listen. What do you feel when you hear fire?
I think with the campfire, I can feel I can listen to it as kind of the whole. I love getting into the details of it, but I can also listen to it as a whole and kind of just feel a settling. Um, I feel like having grown up being in the outdoors and sitting around fires, it feels very nostalgic and um, something I can just sit beside and kind of feel peaceful. And even though I was even noticing that some of the popping and the creaking has some similarities to the ice, and I think
Mm.
that's probably because the wood, as it heats, is expanding
Mm.
um, and breaking and fracturing in its own way. But I think that I can sit there and just hear the whole fire at once without needing to make it more than it is too.
Yeah.
And that can feel very just very nice and very kind of like warming,
Mm.
especially after a night of wind and frozen.
Yeah, it's interesting as you were talking, I was sort of thinking like what we have been listening to today has really been elements in the midst of transformation in a way, right? So water that is freezing, expanding, fracturing, wood that is burning, that is transforming, moving towards ash. And I do think that there's something very compelling about these sort of in between places where we can't talk about just one thing. It's not just water, it's not just fire, but there are all these other elements that make it a whole experience,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And even when we put them together, so when we let this become a journey of walking through pine trees and wind and lying down on the ice and then moving to a fire and resting at a fire, like if you think of that as an evening that you just spent in the woods, we could look at each of those individual things as we broke them out, but you also just might have this experience of a collective moment from the entirety of that, right?
Yeah, yeah, that was beautifully put.
Mm. And I think as we reflect on what winter is for you in the Pacific Northwest, for me in the South, for listeners, I know we have listeners in Australia who are like, it is summer. Why are you talking about winter? I'm sorry for you guys. Listen to this in 6 months. And listeners, and listeners in the UK and just all over the place. And we all have different experiences. And so maybe you're like, oh, that's not what my wind sounds like. Or my frozen lake is X. Whatever your experience might be, maybe we take this time just to think about the collective experience of winter. And Nick, I know you weren't present for the interview that aired the previous week with Jacqueline Suskin. She's a poet and wrote
Mm-hmm.
this incredible book about creativity tied to the seasons.
Hmm.
And we both were sort of gushing around the fact that like winter is our season. It's my season for sure. And it is this woman's season as well. Like if we had to pick a season to live in, we would both pick winter. And it's not because of one thing. It is a collective experience of what winter feels like or invokes. I don't know.
Yeah, it is really a transformative season, I think, and yeah, kind of like the ice fracturing or the wind, kind of calling the change of temperatures of wind coming in and bringing in the colder air or the warmer air.
Mm.
Yeah, and fire is such like a symbol of change and transformation. It's just
Yeah.
really it's yeah, it's such that it's that renewal of everything, and everything has to kind of come back to that bare state before it can blossom and grow and be full again.
Yes. And there's one thing we haven't talked about, so maybe we'll end on this part of the conversation, which is everything that we just listened to took place at night, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there is what is so magical about a winter night? Like to me, it is so potent. And I realize I live in a place where I can absolutely go sit outside and meditate in winter at night. And I'm sure everybody can with appropriate gear,
yeah,
right? But uh, do you find winter nights to be magical? I'm assuming yes, but do
yeah,
you?
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that I mean, I have to somewhat by the force of doing any recording. It has to happen at night in a lot of ways, um, locally anyway. And um, yeah, the days can are beautiful too, and I love the contrast in the mountains between the snow and the trees. But the night is so much more focused and um, but also open, and it's like there's with visual having less vision, it almost like opens up the whole experience. Maybe kind of like with those trees, kind of as the eyes are closed, you can feel yourself expanding into the sound and into the night. And but the stars and everything, it just everything seems there's like a sharpness to it too.
Yes.
That's really mesmerizing for me.
Yeah. And I wonder if a bit of it is, I mean, this is just a off the cuff reflection, but of course, winter is a darker season, right?
Hmm.
The for part of winter at least, there is more dark than there is light. And it's an inward season. It's a season where we think more about rest and dreams and it tends to be a more contemplative time. And while am a morning meditator, usually I do find myself very drawn to an evening meditation, which I do outside. I do all my meditation outside. And so I sit on the back deck and I've like got the stars above me. It's almost like the darkness is asking for attention more, which makes sense because there's more of it, right?
Yeah,
And in summer, that would not necessarily be the case. The light is asking for attention, right?
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. I was thinking a little bit about the it. I was even writing a little bit before this when I was thinking about it, and yeah, it's the darkness is such a part of winter, and it has to be such a part of ourselves too. I mean, we spend it's like our awake time, our sleep time, but we also need to balance our light and our dark, and everything kind of has those two sides to it. And winter is just a great time for that. And I think it can be kind of hard. I feel inclined to stay inside and be warm and watch movies, and but that can also be really distracting from how beautiful it can be to kind of force ourselves to be outside and go through that experience of being at night. I'm impressed that you go out at night in winter to meditate. That's
Well,
very cool.
remember it's like 40 degrees here, so
Still, yeah, yeah. I yeah, it's been like an internal battle for me lately whether I go out and bundle up. I went out briefly the other day and I was like, it's gonna warm up in like a week and I'll go back outside a little bit more. Yeah, this cold snap's been a little extreme.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something to being warm. There's something to burrowing and nesting and being in a
Yeah,
cave, right? We get to
yeah,
experience all of that within winter.
yeah.
So I'm so glad we got to chat about this today, Nick. Thank you. Listeners, if you are listening to this, I might nudge you to click over to YouTube and find this interview again because Nick shared some photographs from places that he's recorded and they're gorgeous and they'll be interspersed throughout this. So you can click over and watch this as well if you so choose. And Nick, you'll be back. Yeah, we're going to do many more episodes together, huh?
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah,
Very much looking
same.
forward to it.
Same. Thank you. All right, guys. To wrap up today's episode, I want us to each have our own experience of moving through some of the elements of winter. And so together, we will find a comfortable spot to sit or lie down. You will decide if you want your eyes to be open or closed. If at all possible, you will put headphones on so that you can really hear each of the sounds. And we will take a journey through the winter woods. And you will hear the sounds that Nick recorded as we move through the woods in winter and we hear wind through pines. And we find a lake that is frozen so solid that it is safe for us to walk out into the middle of, to lie down on the ice and to take in the sounds of the owls nearby, to feel the water beneath us and the night sky above us. And eventually we will make our way back to camp, where we sit down in front of the fire and we feel the heat, we sense the light, and we take in the entirety of each of our individual experiences of winter with the elements of air, water, fire in all their various forms, and the night sky, the ether surrounding all of it. So let's listen in. And as the sounds fade away, you remember where you are. You notice how you feel. And you take all the time you need to let go of that listening experience. Guys, thank you so much for exploring winter with me today. I look forward to many more episodes that include soundscapes, experiences of listening, experiences of contemplation, and connection between the natural world and ourselves. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening to the Mindful Minute. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or leaving me a review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps others to find the show, and let's face it, we could definitely use more meditators in this world. The Mindful Minute is recorded on Muskogee land and produced with the support of Brianna Nielsen Virtual Assistants. To join my live classes, ask questions, or learn more about my teacher trainings, please visit merylarnett.com. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you guys next week.